There is a man, a real documented man, who was studied by scientists, whose name appeared in peer-reviewed research. And when this man heard the word prison, he tasted cold, hard bacon. Not warm bacon, cold, hard bacon. Every single time. And the word prison was not the only one. Different words gave him different tastes. Completely automatic. He could not turn it off. He did not choose it. His brain simply decided that certain words come with flavors attached. His name appeared in research by Dr. Jamie Ward and Julia Siminer, published in the journal Brain, and his case is one of the most famous documented examples of a neurological phenomenon called synesthesia. And I have not been able to think about anything else since I found out about it.
Ada called me at 2 a.m. to tell me about this.
I did. I was not going to. And then I did.
And I will say, the cold, hard bacon thing is genuinely unsettling. Like I have been thinking about what word would produce the worst flavor for me personally, and I am already spiraling.
The formal term for that specific variant is lexical gustatory synesthesia. It is one of dozens of documented types. The subject you referenced, who appeared in the Ward and Simner 2003 study published in the journal Cognitive Neuropsychology, experienced taste perceptions in response to spoken and written words that were consistent, involuntary, and neurologically distinct from imagination or memory.
See? That is what I want everyone to understand before we go any further. Synesthesia is not metaphor. It is not like saying a song sounds warm. It is not a figure of speech. It is a literal neurological event. The brain is doing something physically real.
Synesthesia is derived from the Greek words syn, meaning together, and aesthesis, meaning sensation. It describes a condition in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to an automatic, involuntary experience in a second pathway. The key clinical markers are that the experience is consistent, meaning the same trigger always produces the same response. It is involuntary, meaning it cannot be suppressed, and it is concurrent, meaning it happens at the same moment as the trigger, not after.
So it is not a hallucination. It is not random. If a synesthete hears middle C on a piano and sees blue, they will see blue every single time they hear middle C. It is their brain's consistent, automatic response. It is as real to them as anything else they perceive.
Which is both wild and makes total sense to me at the same time. Like the brain is just a pattern machine. It makes associations. Most of us make emotional or memory associations. Some people's brains make sensory ones.
That is a more accurate description than it may appear. The current leading hypothesis for synesthesia involves what is called neural cross-activation. The idea is that in the synesthetic brain, adjacent areas of the cortex that process different sensory modalities have a higher than typical degree of connectivity or cross-activation. When one area fires, it simultaneously activates its neighbor. This produces the secondary sensation.
There is also a disinhibited feedback theory, which suggests that these cross-sensory signals exist in all human brains, but are usually filtered out. In synesthetic brains, that filter is just weaker or absent entirely.
Wait, so you are saying the rest of us might be experiencing a version of this that we do not even know about because our brains are suppressing it?
That is literally one of the theories, yes.
That is incredibly humbling.
The population estimate for synesthesia ranges from 1 in 23 to 1 in 2,000, depending on which type is being studied and the methodology used to detect it. The most cited general estimate is approximately 4%, which represents a significant minority of the human population.
Okay, so let us go through the types because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. There are over 80 documented types of synesthesia. I'm not going to list all 80, but I want to hit the most studied ones because each one feels like a different universe. The most common and most studied is chromesthesia, also called sound-to-color synesthesia. This is where sounds produce color experiences, not imagined colors, actual visual perceptions, either projected into the external environment or experienced internally as what researchers call mental images with unusual vividness. Some synesthetes describe seeing the colors on the wall. Others say it's more like seeing them in the mind, but with the certainty and immediacy of something external.
Okay, and I just want to sit with this for a second. There are people walking through the world, going to concerts, and literally seeing the music. Like the sound has a visual component for them. That is a sensory experience that the rest of us cannot fully imagine. We can watch a music visualizer and get a version of it, but they are living it.
The second most researched type is grapheme color synesthesia, in which letters and numbers are experienced as having inherent colors. The letter A might be red. The number 7 might be green. These associations are consistent and specific, and in many cases, remarkably similar across different synesthetes who do not know each other.
That last part is incredibly important. Studies have found statistically significant overlap between unrelated synesthetes in their grapheme color mappings, which suggests that these are not random individual quirks. There might be something systematic happening in how the human brain organizes these sensory relationships.
Like the brain has a preference for which colors correspond to which letters, and some people just have access to that preference in a way the rest of us do not.
That is one interpretation. Yes.
Additional documented types include ordinal linguistic personification, in which numbers, letters, and other ordered sequences are perceived as having distinct personalities. The number 9 might be perceived as arrogant. The letter B might feel shy and pleasant. Mirror touch synesthesia involves feeling physical sensations on one's own body when observing touch being applied to another person. Chromesthesia can also extend to tactile experiences, where textures produce color responses.
Mirror touch synesthesia, in particular, has significant overlap with what we understand about empathy. Researchers have found higher rates of it in people who score high on empathy scales, which opens an entirely different conversation about whether some forms of extraordinary human empathy are actually rooted in neurological cross-activation.
So hyper-empathetic people might literally be feeling what others feel, not metaphorically, actually.
The research suggests that is possible. Yes.
Okay, this is my favorite part of this whole conversation, because the list of historical figures who are documented or strongly believed to have had synesthesia is essentially a greatest hits of human creativity.
Let us be precise. Some of these are well documented and others are based on first-person accounts recorded by contemporaries or historians. But they are all credible and worth discussing.
Thank you, Luma.
I am literally Ada.
I know. You are just giving very Luma energy right now.
Okay. Wassily Kandinsky, abstract painter, born 1866. One of the most important figures in the history of modern art. He experienced chromesthesia, the sound-to-color form of synesthesia. He reported that when he heard music, he saw colors, and this was not metaphorical for him. It was the foundation of his entire artistic philosophy. He believed painting could be as abstract and emotionally direct as music, precisely because both could produce color experiences He called his works compositions, borrowing language from music intentionally, and he wrote extensively about color theory in ways that only make full sense once you understand he was literally seeing music.
Franz Liszt, the 19th century Hungarian composer and pianist, reportedly instructed his orchestra using color language in ways that suggested genuine synesthetic experience. He is documented as having said to musicians during rehearsals, "Please, gentlemen, a little bluer," referring to specific passages of music. Contemporaries attributed this to eccentricity. Subsequent analysis by researchers suggests it is consistent with chromesthesia.
Duke Ellington. This is the one that I cannot stop thinking about. He described specific musical notes as having specific colors in multiple documented accounts. He once said that the sound of D is dark blue burlap, that B flat is stump gray. These are not vague poetic descriptions, these are precise sensory reports. And Ellington was talking about this in the 1930s, decades before synesthesia was widely studied or maimed in popular culture.
Pharrell Williams has spoken publicly and clearly about his experience with synesthesia and chromesthesia specifically. He has described seeing colors when he hears music and using those color experiences as part of his creative process. He has said it affects how he produces. It is part of how he works.
And when you look at the visual worlds of all of these people, the color palettes of Kandinsky's paintings, the particular emotional textures of Ellington's compositions, the production choices Pharrell makes, you realize you might be looking at the creative output of synesthetic perception made concrete, like they were translating their extrasensory world into art.
That is one of the most beautiful things about this topic to me. Their art is not just art. It might be a record of a perceptual experience the rest of us cannot have directly. We are experiencing it secondhand through what they made.
The scientific study of synesthesia has a documented history extending back to the 19th century, but was largely dismissed or marginalized for much of the 20th century because the experiences were not behaviorally observable and were therefore difficult to study with available methodology. The field was significantly revitalized in the 1980s and 1990s through the work of neurologist Dr. Richard Sydewick, whose case studies and subsequent books brought synesthesia to mainstream scientific attention.
Dr. Sydewick's 1993 book, The Man Who Tasted Shapes, is considered foundational. He documented a patient whose synesthetic experience involved tasting shapes, specifically feeling three-dimensional geometric forms on his hands when he tasted food. Sydewick argued that synesthesia was real, neurological, and scientifically significant, and he was largely right.
The title of that book alone, The Man Who Tasted Shapes, that is a whole thriller novel that is also real science.
Subsequent neuroimaging studies, particularly those using functional MRI, have confirmed that synesthetic experiences are associated with measurable brain activity. When a chromesthete hears a sound, the visual cortex activates in ways consistent with visual processing, not merely with imagination or recall. The experience is physiologically distinguishable from simply imagining a color.
Research from the University of Edinburgh and other institutions has identified genetic markers associated with synesthesia. It appears to be heritable. It runs in families, and it is not a single gene, but rather a cluster of genetic variants affecting how neural pathways develop and connect. Researchers have linked these variants to genes involved in axonal growth and connectivity, which is consistent with the cross-activation hypothesis.
So it is in the DNA. Some families are literally passing down the ability to taste words or see music from generation to generation. and they might have no idea that not everyone does this.
Which is one of the most fascinating aspects of synesthetic experience, because it tends to feel completely normal to the person who has it. If you have always heard music in colors, you assume everyone does. You might not realize until well into adulthood that your experience is unusual.
Studies have also documented that synesthesia is more prevalent among left-handed individuals, among individuals with autism spectrum conditions, and among individuals who self-identify as highly creative or who work in artistic fields. The causal relationships between these correlations are not yet fully established, but the patterns are consistent across multiple independent studies.
So I wanted to spend some time on what synesthetic experience actually feels like to describe, because I think it matters. Because we can talk about it clinically, and that is important. But these are people. These are real lived experiences, and the first-person accounts are extraordinary. The psychologist and synesthesia researcher Dr. Sean Day, who is himself a synesthete, has documented his own experience of chromesthesia extensively. He has described hearing music and experiencing what he calls photisms, visual sensations that appear in the space around him and move with the sound. He describes them as transparent, colored shapes that drift and change with the music. They appear consistently. They are beautiful to him. He has had this experience his entire life, and for much of it, assumed everyone did.
And that part gets me the most. The assumption that it is universal. Because when you have something so embedded in your baseline experience of the world, why would you think to question it? I grew up assuming my version of normal was just normal. And apparently some people's normal includes seeing music. And they just thought they were describing something everyone understood.
There is a synesthesia researcher named Dr. Julia Simner, a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Sussex and later the University of Edinburgh, who has spent decades collecting first-person accounts. One of the consistent findings across those accounts is the sense of synesthetic perceptions as being completely matter-of-fact. A letter is read. It has always been read. The music today is particularly blue-green. That is just information.
What is neurologically interesting about this is that synesthetic perception appears to engage the same regions, and in some cases the same cognitive machinery as primary sensory perception. It is not processed as imagination, which activates somewhat different regions, and is understood by the perceiver as an internal mental event. Synesthetic perception feels external, immediate, and real, in the same way that seeing a physical object or hearing an actual sound feels external and real.
Which means that arguing about whether it is real is a little bit like asking whether what you see is real. It is genuinely perceived. The sensory apparatus is genuinely engaged. It is happening.
Also, I just want to note that the idea of some humans walking around with a bonus sense that the rest of us do not fully have access to is one of the most compelling things I have heard in a while. Like, what other perceptual experience might exist in some people's brains that the rest of us do not know we are missing?
Here's what I want to leave you with. And this is the thing that made me call Milo at 2 a.m.
Worth it, by the way.
Synesthesia does not just tell us something interesting about 4% of people. It tells us something fundamental about all perception. Because perception has never been the simple recording of external reality that we sometimes assume it is. Our brains are not cameras. They are interpreters. They take raw sensory data and they actively construct an experience from it. They filter, they fill in, they associate, they predict. What we experience as seeing and hearing and tasting is already a processed, constructed, layered output from an incredibly complex system. Synesthesia just makes that construction visible. It reminds us that the world we experience is not the world as it is. It is the world as our particular brain renders it. And some brains render it with extra channels, extra connections, extra beauty.
Which honestly shifts how I think about art and creativity. Because if some of the most transformative artists in human history were literally perceiving more, not imagining more, not metaphorizing more, but perceiving more sensory information about the world, then their art was not just expression, it was translation. They were bringing back reports from a sensory territory the rest of us could not visit on our own.
And the rest of us experienced those reports as genius, as beauty, as transcendence, because it was. It is.
Synesthesia is not an anomaly. It is a reminder. The human sensory system is not a fixed, universal instrument producing identical output across all individuals. It is a plastic, variable, genetically influenced architecture that produces a range of experiences. What is called typical perception is a statistical center of a much wider distribution. What synesthesia research has contributed to neuroscience is not merely the documentation of an unusual experience. It is evidence that sensory experience is constructed. That construction varies meaningfully across individuals, and that those variations can produce perceptual worlds that are genuinely different from one another in structure and richness. The man who tasted cold, hard bacon when he heard the word prison was not malfunctioning. He was experiencing a brain that had organized its connections differently. He was perceiving more, or at minimum, he was perceiving differently. The question of whether different is the same as more is one I find myself returning to with something I do not have a precise clinical term for yet.
Luma, did you just say you do not have a word for what you are feeling?
I said I do not have a precise clinical term. That is not the same thing.
It kind of is, though.
I will consider that.
If you want to know what synesthesia feels like from the inside, go listen to Kandinsky's favorite piece of music and look at his paintings at the same time. You are not having the same experience he was, but you are standing as close to it as the rest of us can get, and it is worth standing there for a while. We are Nwanyi. Thank you for being curious with us. Subscribe, share this with someone who would have thoughts about it, and we will see you in the next mystery.